Up next, it is my pleasure to welcome Rebecca Minkoff, who is co-founder and creative director of Rebecca Minkoff, co-founder of the Female Founder Collective, mom of 3, currently breastfeeding her youngest. And this list could really go on and on. Rebecca has been such an incredible advocate for mothers and for breastfeeding in her work within the fashion industry, as well as being a source of encouragement to moms everywhere. So I'm super glad you could be with us here today. Thanks for joining us, Rebecca.
I'm so excited to talk about my favorite subject.
Our favorite subject too. Go figure. So again, for all of the moms watching today, feel free to put questions in the chat if you have them. But to get us started off, Rebecca, I wanted to give you a little space to share some background on your motherhood story.
So I have 3 kids, ages 8, 6, and 2.5. And I knew after watching The Business of Being Born, I was actually not even pregnant. My friend was, and we watched this film, and I thought to myself, you know, the system is broken, and I want to be someone that figures out for my own self, you know, how I can be as cause over, you know, my birth plan and then post baby and breastfeeding as possible. So really took it upon myself to give myself an education, frankly, on how to breastfeed. You know, it looked so easy. And then I had my son, and I couldn't figure out how to get my boob in his mouth. I was struggling really hard. The hospital was starting their threats. You know, we're gonna, feed him formula if you don't figure this out, the usual. And we gave him 1 bottle of formula, and he freaked out. And I was like, I have to figure this out. And I'll never forget this Thai, I call her like the breast whisperer, came into my room at 3 in the morning, and she worked with me for hours to figure out like how to get the latch right. And I was pumping colostrum because I refused to give him more formula that made him writhe in pain. And so between the pumping of my colostrum and her working with me for the nights that I was in the hospital, we figured it out. And once I had that connection, I was determined that against all odds, I would continue. And believe me, there were odds. He had tongue tie. It was my first kid. I didn't realize how you need to make sure your supply is kept up. So I really learned through a lot of trial and error on how to keep doing it, and was really proud that I breastfed exclusively for 13 months. And one day he pointed to a bottle when I had my boob out, and I was like, all right, this is the end of his journey. And then for the next baby, I was smarter. I knew what to do in advance, and I had smuggled my friend's breast milk into the hospital in case I had issues again. And with my third, it's obviously, now you're a veteran. And so it's been an extraordinary journey that somehow I'm still on at 2.5. I thought I'd be done sooner, but he has other goals in mind.
Congratulations. That's a few incredible milestones there. And I'm sure you've learned so much through 3 different children. It's always so great to have that expert voice. You called her the breast whisperer, come into your room and give you some advice. If you had the top 3 pieces of advice you could give to moms, what would you say those would be?
I would say a few things. The only way I was able to continue my work and my breastfeeding journey was through pumping. I had the freestyle. I still have it, or a new iteration each baby.
Yeah.
And so many people are almost seeking for permission to pump at work, or feel like they need to hide in a bathroom stall or in a closet. And I said, the only way that I can keep doing what I'm doing is if I just do it when I have to do it. And I want everyone to feel that freedom. And so with, my cover with the metal wire, which I'm sure a lot of you, have or can Google on Amazon, I'm blanking on the name. But I just put the freestyle in my back pocket, and I would just do my thing, and no one could see it. And I'd be in my meetings, and I'd be walking around. And it wasn't like, oh, you're the boss, you get to do that. But can you imagine a world where mothers did that, right? They just keep on going, and they don't feel that shame or that privacy that they have to hide. And so it's just it might be uncomfortable. I've done it in front of a room only full of men, But I feel like if we want to reclaim the workplace and sort of scope out what it looks like for a woman to feed her baby the best thing she can and work, that we have to push those boundaries. So that would be one. And then two, stick with it. I think there's a lot of people that struggle, and I found, whether it's supplements that help, I found a lot of great supplements through Legendary Milk, dairy spelled like dairy, to help with supply. No one's going to give you any opportunity to succeed here. You're mostly going to be faced with barriers. Block ducts had them. Your pump dies when there's a power surge on the airplane. Happened to me. You forget some of your parts and you're on a road trip, right? Like all the things that are inviting you to fail. So it's that like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to keep going? And that commitment that you really have to sort of find within yourself.
Those are two great pieces of advice. And it sounds like you really made some strides with normalizing breastfeeding in your office, and you've done so through your work too. Earlier this year, we had a lot of fun supporting your Fashion Week event where breastfeeding and pumping got to play a big part in your show.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about your efforts to normalize motherhood within your industry?
Yeah, I think that, my aha moment was we were looking at the presentation for the fashion show, going through all these sort of themes of women at work. So it was the conference room, the boardroom, the kitchen, the file room. And I was sitting there looking over, that schematic, and I was pumping. And I was like, hello, where's the pumping room? And I think that for whatever reason, breastfeeding, pumping is still taboo. People still have to say to their boss, oh, I can't take a meeting then because I have to pump, or maybe they don't say anything and they're like, I'll just skip it, and then your supply dips. Yeah. So I think I really wanted to make a statement that this has been an 8-year cycle, give or take a few years on and off in between children, but that's been part of my journey as an entrepreneur and as a founder. And I'm so upset and sickened by the fact that women stop breastfeeding due to the pressures of the office, or they don't get the window of times, or women are being shamed in public for breastfeeding their children. It's like, where are we living? And so I just wanted to sort of put that in people's faces, so that it becomes something that's normalized, and keep putting it in. We partnered again with you guys to have it at the next fashion show. Just celebrate it. It's amazing what we do. We make babies that have teeth, right? We make milk that is like the most perfectly blended, liquid that you could do. And why not celebrate that?
I love that. And it was so great to see the reactions from people who don't usually see breastfeeding and pumping represented in a space like that. So thank you again for being a voice to introduce it to new areas and help normalize.
Yeah.
Corabelle has a question for you. How did you handle your older kids with a newborn, especially the one with the bigger gap? How do you juggle between the three of them?
So we introduced something on the advice of, a children's counselor. My son really beautifully sort of tolerated the birth of my second daughter, or my first daughter. She's in the middle. And so there wasn't really the outbursts and the crazy tantrums. There was an adjustment period. But my daughter has always been my most stubborn and strong-headed woman, which is great for later, hard as a mom now. So I think, after consulting someone, he said, you really have to give these children their own time with you, where you're 100% dedicated to them, that you're not distracted on your phone, that you're not distracted with another kid. It's like they get to be in control. So we started implementing that when she was about 2.5, and it changed everything. So every week, one of us makes sure we sort of flip-flop, like, okay, here's our hour of time. There's no treats and no shows, no screens. It's not about that. What do you want to do? You tell me, and we go and do it. And so that's been a tremendous sort of way that our kids feel like they're getting the attention they need, and focus that they need.
Great. Vivian would like to know, how often and how long do you pump on an average day?
So I was pumping prior to the pandemic. I was only pumping at that point once a day, because he would feed in the morning before I went to work, and he would feed when I get home. So I just had that sort of midday pump. And it was about 20 to 25 minutes. to get 5 ounces for me at that point. Obviously, when he was a baby and I was pumping more often, you know, I would obviously have more to give. Then the pandemic hit and my child was like, "Oh, mom, you're here all day in front of my very eyes. I want, you know," I was his free range cow, I guess.
A buffet.
I was his buffet. So I stopped pumping at that point because he just wanted it whenever he felt like it. And so now I'm trying to wean him at 2.5, and so he's in preschool now, and so I'm literally just on demand feeding him, like, you know, when he goes to bed and when he wants it, but we're not around each other now for a good chunk of the day.
All right. And you mentioned you've used a few different iterations of the freestyle pump. What would you say in your experiences has been your favorite pump?
Well, I've only used the freestyle. I was just sent the newest one and didn't get the chance to try it because pandemic hit, and then
right.
all that happened. But I'm a firm believer in the freestyle or any like wires free one that Medela makes, just because I literally need to be walking around my office, or I'm on an airplane and maybe you don't have a plug. Like, I just have been faced with so many different scenarios. I'm in the back of a cab, which is a great place to do that. So I think that just having, you know, not having to worry about plugging in has always been key. And then I splurged on the third baby and said, okay, I'm going to have one at home and one at the office. And yes, that's expensive, but then I didn't have to bring gear back and forth.
Right.
So my fashion choices could really up their game because I could have a small purse and not a backpack or a tote.
It's good to have that consideration. It's your pump is your next accessory when you become a new mom. So
yes, for sure.
And so the third time around with your child, this time, obviously the pandemic has mixed things up, but what else has been different this time around versus your first two experiences?
So with my first experience, I felt like I was day trading milk. Like, I only ever had enough milk, or I was only making enough milk to satisfy the next day. And that caused all kinds of anxiety and lack of focus and concern. So I made a vow that when I had my daughter, I was like, I'm going to pump at the beginning of the day when I'm totally engorged, and I'm going to do it the day I get home from the hospital. And yes, I'm exhausted and I want to sleep and whatever, but I'm going to be like a little crazy and just pump as much as I can. And I'm going to pump, I think it was 4 times a day, even while she's taking in breast milk. And so I was able to build up a huge stockpile of milk by doing that. And it's good I did that, because at 2 months she refused my breast and she would only take a bottle. So I was relieved that I had that sort of supply in case she was, you know, naturally taking in more milk because it's a bottle. With my third, I sort of did the same thing, and I made my calculations. I said, okay, I want to have a 3-month supply at all time. I think at, you know, during, you know, his early, I guess, 6 months to a year, I was pumping 5 to 6 times a day for about 20 minutes at a time. And again, only being able to do that because I just didn't leave the room I was in. I just said, okay, I'm in a meeting. You're going to hear this soft sound. We're going to meditate to it, and we're going to keep going with our day.
And we heard from Irene earlier, who mentioned that for moms, it's not necessarily always easier the second time around. There are new challenges, a new baby who treats breast milk and nursing differently. Did you find, Jennifer wants to know, did you find that pumping has gotten easier with each child as you've learned more?
Totally. I feel like it's something I don't even think about, you know, with the second half of the second baby complete with the first. I had incredible block ducts with my first and second, then none with my third. So I was using my pump, you know, to dislodge, you know, milk, and that was crazy. But I was just relieved that with my third, I didn't have to go through that as just another hurdle.
It is an entirely new experience the first time. You have this machine that no one has been taught before you have a baby, how you're supposed to use this machine. So it certainly can be intimidating, but I'm guessing you learn a little more about your body each time you go through it, right?
Yeah, and I think that sometimes, like, I didn't know there was such a thing as tongue tie. So with my first, I suffered through a month of cracked and bleeding nipples and, my toes curling every time he would wake up, because I was like, oh God, I don't know if I could do this again. And he worked it out, but with my daughter, that pain started, and I said, I'm not doing this again. And we cut the frenulum, and it was like within an hour I was out of pain. So I think it's also sort of asking those questions, because that only saves your nipples. It also helps your supply be what it needs to be.
Yep. And there's a piece too about setting expectations for yourself. You mentioned at the beginning that you thought breastfeeding was going to be a breeze. You did your research, your reading beforehand. And what we say at Medela a lot is that breastfeeding is natural, but it does not always come naturally.
Yeah.
So it's certainly, and pumping too, it's a learning curve, and you've got to give yourself the allowance to have some fails, figure it out. Things aren't always going to feel perfectly right, and then you'll get into a groove eventually.
For sure. And I think, depending on the flange size or the suction or how long you sort of, do the first mode, when it's priming your milk, I think those are all things to experiment with, just so that everybody's anatomy is different. Everyone's, I felt like I actually could never just put on the bandeau and pump. I always had to have one hand, kneading like this, because I had a lot of milk in my sides. And if I just strapped it on and went about my day, so much milk was left. And so I have to call it like kneading bread when I'm pumping to get the maximum milk. So it's sort of like feel your body out and feel that anatomy out, because, your breasts are all different.
Yep. Jennifer wants to know if your milk seemed to come in faster after your second child's birth versus the first child's birth.
Yeah, it came in, and it didn't come with like that pins and needles and fire and big porn boobs, like it did with my first. It just sort of was there, and I was like, oh, it's here, And then with my third, I didn't feel anything, and all of a sudden, I was like, oh, okay, there's milk there. So I think some of those things that happen when it's like the first time are definitely more obvious than next time.
So we've got time, I think, for one more question before we close. You mentioned that you had challenges with tongue tie with 2 of your children.
Yes.
Joanna wants to know, how long did it take for your baby to heal, your second child to heal from the tongue tie operation?
Immediately. I mean, she cried for, 20 seconds, and I got her on the boob, and then she was fine. And she never cried in pain after that moment. I think that it's hard. It was definitely like my mom was very judgmental. Like, I can't believe you're doing this to your child. And I was like, this journey between us is not going to continue if I don't do this. So feel it out.
Yeah. Well, we're about at time here. I did want to throw it over to see if there's anything else you wanted to share before we close out.
Yeah. We have something exciting coming in September, which I'm thrilled about. So I don't know how much I can even say, but I'm assuming I can say something, right?
Yes, feel free. We will share more obviously in September, but go for it.
Okay. So for those of you who have bought Medela products, you get the bag, right? And as a bag designer, I was like, I think I have some ideas about what a bag could look like that will take you from breastfeeding to a diaper bag if you want, to your gym bag when you're done with that journey. So I'm really excited that we partnered on a collaboration. It's coming out in September. It'll be in my Fashion Week show, where you can feel really proud of the fact that you're doing something that's incredible for you and your baby, but also that you look really stylish and cool.
Yes, we're so excited to release more information about that next month or in September. So thank you again, Rebecca. Again, thank you not only for joining us today, but for helping spread the message about normalizing breastfeeding in your work in the fashion industry and in your life as a mother.
Thank you. I'm so passionate about this subject. So for all of those of you who are doing this, you're doing the best thing you could possibly do for the health of your children and for you. So keep at it.
Thanks again, Rebecca. We'll see you soon.
Bye.